guest this evening, Steve Swartz. That was his guitar playing, which you just heard.
I'm working on it.
No, Steve also plays guitar in our group, and that's the only reason I resent the Wales is that they take him away for 2.5 months every year. So
Well, tonight you'll find out where I go.
that's
Okay,
this is it. This is now he can justify. All
Yeah,
that.
right.
Anyway, Steve's been studying gray whales for 45 years.
Yeah, at
is that-
least, yeah.
And you formed your own research.
We're affiliated with the Ocean Foundation, which is a Washington, D.C. based advocacy for the oceans organization. But we partner with the University of Baja California Sur, or Southern University of Baja California, and they're in La Paz.
And that's where you get your research assistants that come in?
Right. We basically support graduate level students, masters and PhDs, while they're in the field for 3 months, and then 3 months after that to do the writing, all the grunt work, all the reporting and writing and analysis. And then we even have some of them work on through the summer. So we're a nonprofit completely, and we support those students to help them nurture not only information on whales and the marine life in the area we'll talk about tonight, but also to help further their careers in marine science.
Excellent. All right, well, I'm going to let you tell us all about
Great.
your study.
Well, thank you so much. Well, let me add my welcome to everyone for coming out this evening. And thanks for setting this up. This is a real great opportunity to meet some new people and share something I enjoy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been doing it for 45 years, right? So we're going to talk about gray whales tonight. And, whoops, wrong way. Hold on. We have the technology, but I have to be trained. So who are these guys? We're going to talk about gray whales. And in the world of whales, you've got all the little dolphins and porpoises, and these are all the toothed guys, the biggest one being the sperm whale. It has teeth. But then you've got the big guys. The blue whale is the largest animal that we know of that's ever lived on the planet. And they're filter feeders. They don't have teeth. And work our way down. The gray whale is up here. As you can see, it's kind of the smallish of the large baleen whales. They're called baleen whales. And there's a coastal whale. Unlike these guys here, the blue whales and fins and the others, humpbacks, everyone's familiar with if you've been to Hawaii, those are oceanic greyhounds. Okay, those are cruisers, long-distance runners, and they migrate over open ocean basins. Gray whales hug the coast. They stay on the continental shelf and usually follow the coastline throughout their life history. They've got a few interesting characteristics. One, they have a couple little throat grooves, which they use to feed with, and I'll get to that in a moment. They have barnacles on them because they're slow swimmers, and along the coastal corridor there's lots of plankton and barnacles. You have any boat owners here? You know all about barnacles and things that foul up your boat. And then they have some little symbiotic animals. They're not really parasites. They're called whale lice, and those live in and around the barnacles, but they do a great function. For example, if the whale's skin is very soft, it's like neoprene rubber. And because these are coastal animals and bottom feeders, they get cuts and scrapes and scratches, and you can't put a Band-Aid on that in the ocean. It doesn't work. So these little guys actually, flood into an open wound and fill it up. And they feed on the necrotic tissue and seal the wound until it heals. So they perform a function, and that's how they make their life. And they're species specific. They're found only on this species of whale, so they evolved together. It's kind of interesting thing. Lots of markings on these guys, and we'll talk about how we use those to further the research that we do with the whales. There are two recognized populations, one in the western North Pacific, and it's a depleted population. It used to migrate up and down the Asian coast, but there's about 300 of them left. They never did receive protection like the other group, like the larger group, which is the eastern North Pacific population here, that summers in the Arctic and then migrates south down the coast of North America to get to Baja California, which is their winter ground. These guys basically are just barely hanging on, and we're not even sure if there's a pure stock, if you will, left, because we've learned from some of the work we do that they actually intermingle up here. And some of the western whales that have been photographed have been picked up down in Mexico where we work. So. And they intermingle during the breeding season. So there's a chance that we've basically lost the western population, genetically speaking. Now, I said they're baleen whales. Baleen is this substance that's kind of like your fingernails, it's keratin. and they've got hundreds of these plates that hang down from the roof of the mouth. They're smooth on the outside, yet they're frayed on the inside. So the outside are these nice ridges, okay? And they'll roll over on the bottom, and they'll suck up the sediment that has invertebrates in it, you know, ghost shrimp and amphipods and all kinds of little invertebrates that they feed on. And then when they back flush it or spit the water back out, all the food hangs up on the frill. It's like the inside of a big scrub brush, okay? And it all hangs on there. I tell the school kids I talk to, it's like when you take a bite of a really good peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you have to lick it off the roof of your mouth. That's how they feed. We can pass that around if people would like to see it. Okay, so they start off in the winter. They're down in the southern part of the range, and then they migrate to the north. And the reason they go to the north is because these guys need a lot of food. And the only places you find a lot of food are in the higher latitudes, both the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere. And these are only northern hemisphere animals. They're not found in the southern hemisphere. So they go where the food is, where there's 24/7 daylight, like a big Grolux lamp. So phytoplankton blooms, all the other macroplankton feed on that, and it just works down the food chain. So they can get tons of food each day if they go up there in the summer. So that's where they go. They go up along the along the continental shelf up to the Arctic. They sort of disperse on the flat lands up there, or flat bottoms up there to feed. But then when the climate changes, or when winter comes along, it goes to darkness, and the weather gets really nasty, and you get ice on the water. Okay, so they're warm, air-breathing mammals, so they head south. And they take and move all the way down to, again, along the coastal corridor down to the Southern California and Baja California in Mexico. And those are their winter grounds. That's where they spend the winter, where they're giving birth to the calves that were conceived a year earlier, and then also mating for the next year. Okay, so the migration gets them to and from the grocery store, but it also brings the males and females together when the females are ready to breed. And this way they're basically breeding all the way down the coast, because in the summer they're too far spread out to find each other. And there are 3 locations that they're headed for in Mexico. There are coastal lagoon systems. The northernmost one is called Ojo de Liebre. It's also got an English name called Scammon's Lagoon. Scammon was one of the whalers that discovered the lagoons in the 19th century, that you could easily get the whales without having to sail across the ocean. You just went to these places and you could take all you wanted till they ran out. The second place is San Ignacio Lagoon, and that's where we're based. It's right there in the middle of the peninsula on the Pacific coast. And then the southernmost area where they aggregate for the winter and breed is Bahia Magdalena. Anybody been down that way to visit any of those places? Ooh, you got a treat in store, you know. Put on your traveling shoes and go on a trip to some beautiful country down there. Okay, so moving along. This is Laguna San Ignacio. This is where the one in the middle, the aggregation area in the middle. And basically it's 30 kilometers long. We're facing to the west, and that's the entrance out there in the ocean and the breakers. The lower part of the lagoon is just a big, deep channel, 70, 80, 90 feet deep in places. And then as you move northeast up into the desert, it starts to shallow out, and you start to get these big flat bajos, or shallow areas, sandbars, that divide the lagoon up into different channels. And so you'll find a more northerly channel and a southerly channel. And then way up here at the top, there's a couple of islands, and there's a big flat basin up here. And the whales use the entire thing, all 30 kilometers during the wintertime. The females that have just given birth like to get away from the mating animals, the females that are breeding and the males that are trying to breed with them. So they tend to move up into the inner parts of the lagoon, stay way up inside, and all the mating activity and the raucousness that goes with that takes place down closer to the ocean's entrance. The shores of the lagoon are basically flat. There are no trees, and they're ringed with these mangrove estuaries that are fed by the tidal flow in and out twice each day. So now we're rotating to the south, looking to the south, and coming all the way around and looking back out at the ocean. There are barrier islands that protect the lagoons from ocean swells, and then the entrance area here, which is a series of breakers, but that's no problem for the whales. They can get through that easily. And that's where our field station is. Basically, we have this one little facility here and a couple of work sheds. We use open pangas or open outboard boats, outboard driven boats. The reason we do that is because that's what the ecotourists use. And if we use the same type of boat and the same engine that the whales are accustomed to, we can mingle. And they're not afraid of us. If we brought in a big oceanic vessel or something like that, they'd go, whoa, what the heck is this? So this allows us to kind of mix and mingle in with everybody. When we're not, we live in tents in the winter, and when we're not there, all the camping equipment goes in the shed here, okay, which is our laboratory. So we just leave a lot of footprints, and that's the only, if you want to call it bricks and mortar, is plywood and thatch, but anyway, that's the only building that we have. A number of different aspects to the work. One is the acoustics work. We listen to all of the sound in the lagoon, and we've been monitoring it. This is Aaron Thode from Scripps in La Jolla, and he's been monitoring the sound in the lagoon, sounds in the lagoon since 2005. It's the longest acoustic database for any marine protected area. These are all protected by federal, Mexican federal law. They're like national parks, okay? And so this is what it sounds like. Do we have any divers or snorkelers in the audience? Have you ever heard that crackling sound when you put your head underwater? Okay, those are snapping shrimp. They make the loudest noise on the planet. Very short duration, but if you've got millions of them, it sounds like frying bacon. I never realized that until I put my head in the water as a student scuba diver off of Catalina Island in California. But that's a very, very common sound.
What is the distance from the mouth of the lagoon
to the northern end? 30 kilometers, okay? The sounds you heard included the other cetacean that's here. These guys are resident. These are bottlenose dolphin, and they stay there all year round. They don't migrate. And they produce the squeaking sounds you get to hear. Sounds like a brrr, brrr type of sound. Yeah, they have no pride at all, no shame. You hear some high-pitched little whistles, like a bird whistle. Okay, there we go. They produce, they produce two basic calls. The click trains, the brrr sounds, are actually echolocation sounds. They're sending out a rapid series of pulses, and they listen with their brain, and their big foreheads full of fat. It's a big, like a lens that receives everything. So you can see them sweeping their head around and making these sounds. And that's how they navigate, day or night, because they don't have any place to go at night except the ocean, so they have to be able to get around. And then the whistles, the high-pitched whistles, those are social calls. That's individual to individual or groups. The dolphins are very socially oriented. They live in a group. They take care of each other. They will watch each other's kids, and so on and so forth. So they're very, very tight-knit socially. The baleen whales, like the gray whale, solo. The only time they get together is to breed, and if they meet somebody on the feeding grounds, they chase them off because they want to feed on the feed themselves. The only thing that brings them together, like I mentioned, is the migration, and it brings them together during a time when it's time to breed and get ready for the next year. And so here's some gray whale sounds. Reminds me of a percolator. This audience understands what a percolator is. There are people I speak to that have no clue what that means. Starbucks? No, 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 no. So these are the pulses. They actually make about 12 distinct pulses that are distinguishable from each other. And those are called knocking sounds or conga sounds. We're not sure what they mean, but we've started using, the acoustics team, with our help, has been starting to use drones, one with a hydrophone, or microphone that goes underwater, and then one visually with a camera. And they'll fly out to a group of whales, and they'll land the hydrophone drone on the water, and it lowers the hydrophone, and they're directional, so they can tell where the sounds are coming from. And then you look at the surface behavior, and they're just now beginning to start to understand the context of which calls are made during what types of encounters. It's a beginning, but it's going to take a while to figure it all out. But anyway, they're working on it. Our biggest and most important tool is a camera. When Mary Lou and I went down there the first time in 1977, we had a colleague with us from British Columbia named Jim Darling, and he came to visit us because he heard we had gone to San Ignacio Lagoon, and he said, are you taking pictures? He'd been studying gray whales up in Vancouver, okay? And we said, no. He says, you've got to take pictures because every single whale's different. And you can tell the individuals apart, and the marks are permanent. They stay. They're like a tattoo. So we started doing that, and sure enough, he was right. We learned things about how long a particular whale will stay in a lagoon area, because we keep rephotographing the same individual. We learn about which areas they go to, all those 3 lagoons, because there are other colleagues we have that have taken pictures in the other lagoons, and we have catalogs on the internet. We compare them so we can see movements between areas. Calving intervals for females, how often they reproduce, movements among the areas, and minimum age. So I'll digress here for just a minute. Again, this audience can recognize what those are. It's not a camera, okay. In the 6 years that Mary Lou and I were first down there and got the first research started down there, we came home with, boxes of these notebooks and these little slide holder pages and all the ectochrome and kodachrome slides. And we were still just starting to try and find our career direction, so we were moving all over the country. And we ended up, Miami, Woods Hole, Seattle, back to San Diego, and so on. And the last trip to Miami, and then headquarters, of course, Silver Spring, I kind of put my foot down and I said, look, I'm not paying the movers to schlep these boxes. This stuff is like 40 years old. It's useless. I'm going to have them carted off to the dump. And Lulu said, no, 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 no. She's a scientist, like me. She said, you never destroy or get rid of original data because you'll never, ever be able to collect it again. So like a good married couple, we compromised. We bought a scanner. And the 25% or so that still had an image on them that wasn't all foggy from fungus or the dyes hadn't faded, we scanned, and we sent those to our colleague, Sergio Martinez, who's at the University of Southern Baja California Sur in La Paz, and he handles all of our databases for the photo ID, bless you, the databases for all the photo ID and all the analysis. And he wrote back and he said, I'm finding matches with your pictures. And I said, those whales got to be dead. They're long gone. He said, no. I said, what are you matching them with? He says, with whales we've seen the last 2 or 3 years. So these guys, like this one here, we call the old timers. This particular female was first photographed by Mary Lou and I with a calf in 1977, and then periodically we've seen throughout the years all the way up until last year. So we've sort of grown up with these whales. If you do the math, they have to be 6 to 8 years old to be reproductively mature. And if you add the interval between the first photograph and the most recent photograph, we're looking at an animal that's 53 to 55 years old. So we've been growing up with these guys. They're sort of family. Here's another example. This one we've never seen with a calf, so we're pretty much safe in assuming it's a male. All right? Otherwise, there are no other physical differences in them if you just look at them. So that was one of the benefits of holding on to the slides. And right now, I think that counts up to about 57 or 58 of the whales that we photographed back in the 70s and early 80s we're still seeing, are still producing calves and still coming back to Laguna San Ignacio. to say hello. For example, of all of the photographs we did, this is up until 2000 and, well, when was COVID? 2019, 2020? Yeah. 34% of the whales that we recaptured or saw more than once, or more than twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, were females with calves. Single whales, on the other hand, only 9% return. And if you think about their biology, the females are coming down here to give birth to a calf and then find a protected, sheltered area to take care of that calf. These guys here, 50% of the singles are males, and they're looking for females for breeding opportunities. So they're moving around, they're bar hopping. Basically going from one place to the other, looking for a chance, to perpetuate their genes. And so we see them not that often as a higher turnover rate of the single whales than we have of the females with calves that we know are breeding females. We were interested in calving interval, how often they have them, and so what these are number of years between calves, okay? So 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. The most common pattern is 156 in this sample of a 2-year cycle. Mary Lou did this back when we first finished the study back in 1982, and she came up with an average of 2.25 years between calves based on a sample of 60. It's kind of gone up over the years with different students working up the same kind of data, and the most recent estimate is just under 2.4 based on a sample of 365 individuals that we followed over about a 15-year period. So this gives us an idea of what the breeding frequency is of a female, successful breeding frequency, because a calf survived, but it also in total gives us an idea of what the reproductive potential of the population is. Are they going down, are they going up, and so on and so forth. And that'll become important here as we get further into the talk. Again, matching the photographs. A colleague of ours from Oregon State, Bruce Mate, put the first radio tags on western gray whales, and we were all expecting them to go down and show us where at the same latitude as Baja California, but on China's side, okay, the China Sea, where the breeding grounds are for them. Well, what did they do? They headed east across the Pacific and joined up with the eastern North Pacific population and went to Mexico. Surprise! More evidence about, we may not have purebred, eastern gray whales anymore. And so we've got, as of 2022, we have 50 individuals are photographically matched from the western Pacific to the eastern Pacific in Mexico, and that included 11 females that had calves. And so we're now talking again with more evidence that there might be some inbreeding going on. We may not even have true pedigreed eastern gray whales or western gray whales. They're mixing with the western guys. So of these various types of observations, we started seeing something that was kind of strange, and that began in 2017 for us. But it leads up to what became known as an unusual mortality event, or an UME, and I'll explain. When we do our counts in the lagoon of how many animals are there, this is 0 down up to 160 here. This is January 15th all the way across to the end of the season, which is early April, okay? So we normally would have in the lagoon in between 2015 and 2018, anywhere from 80 to more than 100 females with their calves in the lagoon. And then all of a sudden, the floor dropped out. And beginning in 2018, we had, just barely 20 showing up every year, okay? This little bump at the end is actually not from whales that gave birth in or near Laguna San Ignacio. They're migrating north, coming from the south with calves that are already a couple months old. So that's why you see this little bump at the end. But this was really troublesome because now we're having less than 20 calves when we normally would count somewhere in between 80 and 100 in the lagoon. So we weren't sure what was going on with that. And then we started seeing skinny whales. On average, in a normal situation, you get 5-6% are skinny. They're elderly, weak, diseased, injured, whatever. They're the runts. And so there's always a few skinny ones again. But in 2018-19, that percentage jumped from a few percent up to 30%. and that persisted for a number of years. So we have a normal fat-looking whale, and they should be fat because they're coming off a summer of feeding. This is as fat as they get. They don't feed during the winter, so they're living off their body fat, okay, it's energy reserves. But whales showing up in Mexico with, you know, the backbone showing and the ribs showing, something was wrong. Something was definitely wrong. So some of our students, Blossom, Irandi, Flor, Minnie, and there's Dr. Martinez, the fellow who showed us about the value of those old slides, got to work and looking at the photo IDs, and they started scoring whales that we photographed based on their body condition. Now this is like a normal head. You see here the blowholes where they breathe, and there's nice smooth back. Then after a winter of fasting, you lose some of that body fat because that's the end of the skull right here. So you lose some of that fat, but these guys were really skinny, okay? There's just no fatty tissue at all. They would also score normal flanks, and then here's the tops of the scapula sticking out like that. And then normal, you know, lateral side, and here we see the spinal column is very, you know, instead of being convex, it's concave because all that body fat is gone. So we're looking at hungry whales here, starving whales. So they assigned scores to these, and what we could see here, this sample of single whales, this is from 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. We saw the good conditions were increasing in our sample. Fair condition, okay, we're just kind of hanging in there. But the poor condition, the ones that were skinny, like I said, went from 5 or 6% up to 23%, 30%, and then 19%. And the last 2 years, it's dropped back down to something close to what we would expect normally. Okay, so we had fewer calves, skinny whales. I want to go past that one. But scoring those pictures is somewhat subjective. You know, I could give them to a half a dozen of you and you'd all come up with similar but not identical scores. So we brought in the drones. Love technology. Okay. So this is Fabian Rodriguez, and he's our drone chief. And he'll show you how we use the drones to evaluate the health of a whale. You launch it from his office. What a great office. Except for when it rains. And here we go. Head on out to the lagoon. Find yourself some whales. These drones have radar altimeters, infrared cameras, high definition video, and a bunch of other sensors on them. They're very high-tech drones. But he flies them, you know, from a comfortable spot in the shade, and he's recording when the whale gets horizontal on the water in HD video. But he also can take still pictures, and then even after the fact in the lab, you can take a couple of pictures and you can overlay them to get a full length, again, lining up the markings that are on the whale so they all match. And this way, he's able to get accurate measurements of the whales. You can see all the individual markings that are on the backs of these guys. These are from natural pigmentation they were born with. Some are scars that they've acquired over time, but they're all different. There's no two exactly alike. And that's a baby who looks hungry to me. Come on, Mom, wake up. I'm hungry. We've got some moms here, right? You know what that's all about. Feed me, feed me. So he gets a good picture like that. The drone's recalled back to the office. He heads back home. And unfortunately, the batteries have not gone. They have fail-safes now. If the battery gets to a certain point, they automatically come back to their source, their home base. So that's good. It's a lot less expensive to have to replace drones that go for a swim. So a good picture is like this, like I said, totally horizontal, okay? And what they do is they divide it up into 5% sections, okay, like so. And I'm going to jump ahead here. If you take and do a little simple geometry with these 5% sections, okay, pretend the animal's a cylinder, you can estimate its mass. And if you can estimate its mass, you can estimate its volume. And then from there, if you take a picture of the whale in January, when it first comes down from the feeding area, when it's the fattest, and repeatedly photograph that same individual, you can see it shrink. And just the opposite with the calves. You watch them grow. Because mom's turning her body fat and energy into calf via mother's milk. which is 60% butterfat. It's one of the highest in the world for mammals. And so here's what you get. As we expect, this zero line is the average condition index of health for the whales. So if you're above the line, up in here, you're doing okay. If you're below the line, you're losing weight, all right? And so we expect the calves, when they're first born, they're kind of thin, but right away they start to fatten up. So this is 217, 218, 219, 220. We've got obviously records now. We're getting a paper ready to publish all the way through 224. So the calves are growing. The moms over here are losing weight, but they rarely cross that average line. So there's a self-preservation aspect of this going on. But the juveniles and the adults, if they're coming down with average weight and fasting all winter long, they're losing weight. And you see the slope of these lines are all going down. And down here, we have the same measurements that we take with the drones on live whales with dead stranded whales. And so you see they're starting to approach this critical mass area where they're not going to survive. So we're starting to get some evidence here that all of this stuff is acting together to create this mortality event, and that's exactly what started happening. It's my former employer, our former employer. This black line is the 18-year average strandings along the west coast of North America. Includes Baja California and Canada. And you can see that in 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, and there's the 18-year average, we had a real spike in mortality, strandings, animals coming ashore dead, okay, and emaciated. And all the way throughout the entire range, not just in one place. We were having all age and sex classes washing up on the beaches dead. And everybody's going, what the heck is going on? So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration declared they have the ability to declare what's called an unusual mortality event, and that frees up resources to put together working groups of biologists and other experts, oceanographers and so on, to try and go out and respond to the strandings, get samples that they can, measurements, and then try and put the pieces together and see what the heck is going on, try and find out if there's anything that can be done to intervene. And they can do this for not just whales, they can do it for fish and other types of marine life. So, what's going on? Well, our good friends, the oceanography community, when we started consulting with them, said, haven't you been reading our papers for the past decade? There's a regime shift going on driven by climate change in the North Pacific. We went, oh yeah, I saw that on the news, yeah. So we started working with them, and basically they started putting together the pieces of the puzzle, and we're discovering that there's strong evidence suggesting the transformation of the Pacific Arctic ecosystem is underway, and it is underway. And the thing that most people realize or recognize from the news is the loss of the sea ice. You've probably heard about that. This is March of 2013, and this is the ice sheet in March. It goes all the way up through the Bering Strait into the Arctic, okay? And then 6 years later, March 2019, it's gone. It's just not there. It never formed. Now, this is the permanent pack ice. There's also the seasonal snow and seasonal ice. When all this stuff melts, it puts a lot of fresh water into the North Pacific, okay? And that's part of what drives this bloom of plankton every year. You have deep oceanic water coming out of the photic zone that has had nothing drawing its nutrients down, so it's like fertilizer coming up, mixing with the fresh water, sun shining on it, and you get a plankton bloom. And then that's the basis of the whole food chain for all the Arctic species, be they birds or pinnipeds or seals, sea lions or whatever. And so they're telling us there's stuff going on in the Arctic that we've not seen before. This has happened for thousands of years, but usually over thousands of years, and the oceanographers are telling us now it's happening in decades. It's accelerated. And I'm not going to even go into the carbon thing, but you understand what's happening here. So what we're watching in our lifetimes, something I never expected, is a shift. On the left-hand side, we have what I grew up with, and that is a benthic-dominated past, or a bottom fauna ecosystem. Ice algae, and then the phytoplankton. The ice algae is the dominant organic source of material, and that's because on the bottom of the ice, if you watch some of the Discovery shows and some of the YouTube channels and so on, it gets like a carpet of green growing underneath it where the light can come through. And as it gets heavy, it peels off. And all that green carpet settles to the bottom and is fed upon by invertebrates and then fish and then other animals that eat the fish. So we have what's called a benthic-based system. And it feeds the demersal fish, feeds gray whales, bearded seals, walrus, diving ducks, and the plankton, the zooplankton, the filter feeders of zooplankton, was the minor component. Well, now we've watched a transition. And so we're looking at a system now that's pelagic dominated, okay? So it switched from ice algae to phytoplankton, from ice algae to now to photoplankton. And so the filter feeders, the shrimps, the fish that filter feed, anchovies, sardines, things like that, are now the new basis. And the benthos is the minor player. So the hint is that wherever the gray whales were going, and they usually return to the same locations because they're smart, they know where the good grocery stores are. They go back there and feed. Well, if they go back there and there's no food, they have to start looking for someplace else. There's also another compounding factor, and that is in a bad ice year. It takes a long time for the ice to recede in the spring. The whales can't get in there, and they have to wait for the ice to break up to get in there. So some years they have a shorter summer season. They're not getting enough food, even if the food's available. But it looks like from some of this, historical feeding areas are just not available anymore. And that could help to explain why we're seeing skinny whales coming off the summer feeding grounds when they should be fat, because they're just not being able to fill their tanks up.
Is that true with the crabs?
Yes, yes, yeah. Enjoy your snow crab now if there's any around, because you're not going to see it for a while. It's going to take a while for it to come back. So you take that environmental information and you start to pair it with the history of the gray whales. The Southeast Fisheries Science Center, where my old home is in La Jolla, started monitoring the gray whales in the 60s, the late 60s. It's just straight tequila. Okay. 1968, they started counting the whales. They do this just south of Monterey at a place called Granite Canyon. It's just south of Pebble Beach. Got a lot of golfers here I can see, right? Yeah. Okay, never mind. And the continental shelf is very narrow there. It's less than a kilometer until you hit the deep water outside. So the whales are like funneling right by here. It's a good place. It's like standing on a street corner. You can just tabulate them as they go by. Group sizes, females with calves, adults, and so on. So they've been doing that. And this is the pattern up until this year, 2024 over here. We see that this sort of cycle, they kind of go through a rise where there are more than 25,000 in the population, and then they crash. And then they start to come back again, but then they crash again. And then most recently, they got up to about 28,000, and then there's the mortality event that we've been seeing the last couple of years, where the numbers have gone down. In 2016, the estimate was, I think, 27,000 gray whales in the eastern North Pacific population. This past year, it's down to 14,500. We lost a lot of animals in the last 4 or 5 years. And that could also account for why we're not seeing the calves. The age sex class that's most energetically stressed are the breeding females, because they're either pregnant or migrating or both. And then after the birth, they've got to nurse that calf. So they're still draining energy and putting it into the next generation. And then we lost a lot of our breeding stock. So we're hopeful that in the next 5 or 6 years, as the younger females reach reproductive age and start reproducing, we'll see those calf counts coming back up. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, they're too small. It's 1968, 70, 72, 74, every 2 years, 76, 78. Here's 1980. There was a dip, and then say there's a peak here. So statistical modelers like to take data like this and then put it through these fantastic, complicated models that I don't even have a clue to try and understand. But what they've identified is this cycling effect in the gray whale population. And so we're learning that a species like this particular animal that's subject to the coastal changes and the dynamics of a coastline environment may have evolved a cycle where they actually cycle through, okay, in order to persist. Because there were times when the continental shelf wasn't available during an ice age, for example. and they had to compete out in the open ocean with whatever, the big greyhounds I talked about, the blue whales and the fin whales and the humpbacks. So they figured out a way to do that, and perhaps this is actually a survival pattern for this population. Now, this is stuff we're just learning. Whales are kind of elusive. They're hard to study. The beauty of the gray whale is you just have to go to the right place and they come to you. You don't have to sail across the ocean to try and find them. They come to you, and you can just gather as much information as you can. So they have a population history of rising and falling. Their feeding grounds shift from traditional areas, because some of the areas we know, the oceanographers tell us, where they used to be full of gray whales and full of the amphipods, the bottom crustaceans that they feed on, aren't there anymore because of the climate change effects. Mortality events and population decline might be part of their long-term strategy, if you want to call it that, okay, in order to survive. Of course, that's associated on the downside with the calf production it declines, and then the skinny whales is an indication of the health problems that they may be having. So what's going to become of these guys? Okay. Here's a picture of the Bering Strait 21,000 years ago. There was no continental shelf seas. It was all, whoops, come back. It was all, covered in ice most of the time, or covered with water they couldn't get to. So they were out here in the open ocean competing as best they could, while the blue whales and humpbacks and the others were also evolving. But they managed to do it. And then as the ice, during the Pleistocene, over the past 120 to 160,000 years the gray whales have been around, has been submerged multiple times. Okay, and then it's been above sea and it's been below sea several times. So they've had to put up with this dynamic fluctuations in their resources availability, and they've succeeded. So anyway, I'll just go through this quickly. Gray whales are undergoing environmental changes more rapidly than expected, like the oceanographers say. Instead of thousands of years, we're looking at things changing in the ocean in decades. They've expanded their foraging efforts. Our colleagues that study them in other parts of the range say they're seeing gray whales in places they've never seen them before. And what are they doing there? They're looking for food. And when they find it, they stay there and they just keep eating until the food's gone and they go to another place. So they've changed their locations. Apparently, gray whales have experienced high mortality events and lower calf production and shifts in their seasonal distribution. Again, this is something we're learning about their strategy for survival in the ocean. Skinny whales suggest low body fat reserves and insufficient energy, and they're expanding their foraging efforts in time and space. And they may require additional energy. So we'll just have to see what the future holds for them and for us. Climate change just doesn't affect whales, it affects everything on our planet. Okay. So their name is Escherichthus robustus, their Latin name. And robustus comes from a Norwegian word, I believe, a Latin word for sturdy or strong, oaky. Okay? And I think that's appropriate, because they're coastal species with a generalist, flexible feeding strategy. It's been evolved over time and shaped by the dynamic coastline they evolved in. They're responsive to feeding opportunities throughout their range. Okay? They're experts at bottom feeding, but they can also skim and gulp, like a blue whale or a fin whale. Okay? And they're good at finding alternative prey. They can feed on everything from their basic crustaceans they feed on to small fish, krill, like a blue whale, swarming euphausiids, okay, so on. So they've got some flexibility. Push comes to shove, they can find a way to get by. No, that's too small. Those are the microscopic plants that the macroplankton that these guys feed on filter. Okay, so they're close to the basis of a food chain, and that's why they respond environmentally so quickly, but they're not like a killer whale way at the top that feeds on other mammals. There's several different layers up there that makes it easier. So I would say don't say goodbye just yet. And I have to plug our sponsors. We are fortunate to have a very generous and supportive community of people that help us. Been doing so since 2006. Of course, these are the heavy lifters, all of our students and colleagues. And now there's a bonus. You got to give credit to the whales. This is what I'm doing down there, Bill. This is not a trained whale. It's a free-ranging female gray whale and her calf. Favion's going to get wet here, I think. Yeah. Pardon?
Where was this taken?
San Ignacio Lagoon, where we work. Yeah, yeah. They're curious. Nope. They will come up and rest their head against it because the outboard motor is always running, so they can, again, acoustically, that's how they navigate. So if they can hear you, they know where you are, and they won't get lost in the surface noise, and that could cause an accident. So we always keep the engine on so they can hear it, because the boat is like a big speaker cone. It's fiberglass and it's vibrating. And you'll see she'll put her head right up against it and listen to the sound. You shut the engine off, which we've experimented, they lose interest and they go away. But right now it's purring to them, and it's an attractant. And there's no fear because nobody's pursuing them, nobody's hunting them. There are a bunch of tourists that come down whale watchings in the same types of boats, so they're accustomed to the boat, they're not afraid of it, there's no threat. And they're big, curious mammals, especially the little ones, because they're only a couple months old, so they're exploring everything.
How long will the calf stay with you?
Just a year. Just a year, yeah, yeah.
Were they ever hunted?
Oh, yes. They call them the 19th century Yankee whalers, but they also came from Portugal and Spain and whatever. But the drill was to go around Cape Horn in the summer, quote unquote. It's not very summery down there, but anyway, into the Pacific, and they would sperm whale all summer long. And in the winter, the sperm whales would leave. They migrate away. So they needed something to do, and that's where Scammon got his fame, because he was a merchant mariner who discovered that you could seal elephant seals and whale along the Mexican coast in the wintertime, because all these whales were congregating in these areas. So they went in there with their boats, and it was like shooting fish in a barrel. They're just popping them left and right, and the population crashed. And by the turn of the century, 1880s, 1890s, it wasn't economically feasible anymore. And the last gray whales that were being whaled by shore stations all along the North American coast, as far north as Vancouver. And that's where they would have somebody up on a hill with a spyglass. They'd see the whales coming. They'd get in the boats, row out there, harpoon them, and then drag them in, and then flens them out on the beach. Anyway, so yeah, this was the days before petroleum, and whale blubber was used for oil to light our homes, their homes, anybody's home at the time. Petroleum came along later, and that was good because the whale populations worldwide, and including the big whales in the Antarctic, had gotten so low they were really not economically feasible to hunt them anymore for energy. And so petroleum took over. And then after World War II, the International Whaling Commission was formed, and all the nations agreed that certain populations of all of the whales, including the gray whales, needed protection to let them try and come back. And that has held. There's some exceptions. We don't need to go into that right now. But it has worked basically internationally. And so that's why you're seeing humpback whales in Hawaii, and right whales in Argentina, and blue whales right off of La Jolla and San Diego, it's a recovering population. Now they live, like we talked about, gray whales, probably 70, 80 years is not unusual for a gray whale. Bowheads, they've recovered Paleolithic spear points and heads out of ones that are harvested by the Inupiats that have a treaty they can take for cultural purposes, and they use everything. They don't have anything else up there, it's just ice. Or less and less ice these days, but so they hunt them, but they find when they flens them out, they find these old hunting tools that are made of stone and ivory, and they date back more than 100 years. So some of these whales, like a bowhead in the Arctic, can live more than 100 years. So it takes a long time for them to recover. And now the problem for conservationists like ourselves is climate change going to lap them? You know, is it going to upset the environment so bad that some of these bigger populations of larger whales may not have a chance to come back? So.
The Japanese still hunting whales?
Yes, they are. Yep.
On one slide you have it said 21,000 years ago, but it had BP at the end. What does that mean?
Before present?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Never seen that one before.
It's an old graph. I should. They have. They have different. Yeah, before common time or something like that. Anyway, that's an older slide, but it's the most illustrative one I could find. Yes.
Is there any data or information available as to how old a female can still reproduce and act young?
In the toothed whales, there's some exceptions that they will reach. They'll cease breeding or producing calves in the latter years of their life. Some of the large whales like these will conceive and bring a calf to term until they die. The oldest gray whale we have on record was 75 years old, and she was harvested in the 1960s out of Richmond, California. And when they did the dissection on her, necropsy it's called, and looked at her ovaries and all the scars in there, one every 2 years for a birth, she was 75 years old and she was pregnant when she was killed. Yeah. So we know for gray whales at least, they'll probably continue to breed until they die. There are some exceptions in the toothed whale category. Don't have information like that on blue whales or fin whales in the big oceanic guys, because there's nobody harvesting them, thankfully. So we don't have that kind of data.
Those whales that were skinny,
Mm-hmm.
if they were female, were they able to breed?
No. They either can't bring a calf to term, so they'll abort. There's a biological phenomenon that basically preserves the female's life if she has to make a trade-off. So she'll lose the calf, even if she's conceived one. Then other calves are born, but they're runts. They're not getting the nutrition they need, so they're either born stillborn or they don't survive. And mom can't feed them because she doesn't have the energy to do that. Yeah, back here.
I had a question on the sound recording. Do you record to see if they produce sound beyond or above or beyond human hearing? Like to see the full audio range frequency?
The dolphins, yes. Okay, they produce very high frequency sounds that we can't hear, but the hydrophones they have can record them, and then they change the speed of the sound. And they can look at the frequency components. The large baleen whales use very, very low frequency sounds, usually no more than 2 or 3 kilohertz at the most. Very, very low sounds. That's why I was telling John we needed a nice sound system like this where you even hear them. If we play them on a computer, you can't appreciate what really is going on there. So they use the very, very low frequency sounds. And again, the toothed whales are the experts at echolocation. They use those pulse trains like a bat, okay, to get reflections off of the bottom or other individuals or whatever and so on, and that's how they navigate. We're really not sure how an animal like a gray whale navigates or a blue whale navigates, other than long wavelength reflections of some sort, but we do know they learn the ocean bottom, okay? If you look at the tagged blue whales and fin whales, the big high migrators throughout the hemisphere, they follow the same paths. And a colleague of ours who was a mentor of ours, Raymond Gilmore, who worked at the Natural History Museum in San Diego for many, many years, he was their chief mammalogist. He looked at the gray whale migration coming past Southern California and was the first one to map it as to where what whales were using as they come around Point Conception and go through the Channel Islands and then go past Catalina and then San Clemente and then down south to the La Jolla area and then on to Mexico. And he noticed that they were following the underwater mountain ranges. I mean, they're just like a road, And he equated back to the times when that area was above sea level and they couldn't use it, so they were migrating outside. one of the other clues was that even today, they may come to an island like Catalina Island or San Clemente Island, and rather than pass on the eastern side or the mainland side, they pass on the outside. They could go on the eastern side, but they don't. They go on the outside. So he says that's probably some sort of, cultural memory that if you come to the island, you go around that way. You don't go the other way, you may get stuck in shallow water somewhere. But they seem to follow the underwater contours. Now they're having to do this. We know they can't produce high-frequency echolocation type sounds. At least no one's been able to demonstrate that that happens. But they do produce the low-frequency sound. So they're using some sort of alternative low-frequency-based navigation technique to follow the ocean around, and that's how they find their way. Yes?
So you said as they migrate for different food sources, I'm just curious, have any organizations tried to replenish food sources to keep them in an original location? Or mock that, or was it too dangerous to
It's not dangerous, it's just impossible. I mean, we've had, some of my students have said, can't you just get big bricks of krill, and frozen krill, float them out there, and as it thaws, they get, no. They have to feed on fresh, naturally occurring. They just have to find the food. And what's happened with some of the historical breeding grounds that were more southern latitudes have now shifted to the north. This has happened terrestrially too. We're seeing forests go further north, including the bark beetles that eat the trees. So there's been this shift to northern latitudes, and some of these prey areas are being reestablished or being established for the first time. And who goes there? The whales find them. That's where they go. So that's a good question. And all I can say is that we know that the gray whales, their ancestors, their stem stock, were first described from what's now the Mediterranean basin, off the Atlantic. At the time that these fossils were laid down, just between 2.4 and 5 million years ago, all the cetaceans and all the marine life was evolving because we had a global ocean. There was no Panama Isthmus to separate them. When that happened, it isolated the ice, what's now the Atlantic and the Pacific. And the gray whales had already moved into what became the Pacific, but they were also in the Atlantic, but they died off. They just disappeared from the fossil record after that two ocean basins were separate. And in the Pacific, they continued to speciate and evolve, and the oldest fossil gray whales are called ancestral archaic Escherichtids. I can't say that. Ancient gray whale stem stock, the whales that became gray whales, the modern gray whale, are found in Japan and in La Mesa, California. Every time they build a new housing project in La Mesa, you can count on it. They have to stop, call a natural history museum, the whole paleontologists come out, oh dear, and let them gather together all of the fossils that they can manage to obtain from that spot. If you do go to San Diego sometime, the Natural History Museum there has an extremely interesting exhibit of a 120,000-year-old gray whale, or proto-Escherichtid, proto-gray whale for the modern whale. And you walk in the room and it's like all articulated there, and they've made the missing pieces so it's a full skeleton, And it looks kind of like a gray whale, but it doesn't have the arched skull. It's more of a flattened skull, like a fin whale. And it's got some other characteristics that but you walk around and you look at it and you go, yeah, I could see it. It could be there for sure. So no one has discovered any, to get to your point, no one has discovered any gray whale remnants or fossils in the southern hemisphere. However, I will qualify that with climate change melting our ice in the higher latitudes in the northern hemisphere. The Northwest Passage has been opened frequently in recent years. And all the oil companies are vying for rights to drill up there, and the shipping people don't want to go through the Panama Canal, they want to go across the top, so it's looking at a lot of boat traffic, and of course all the nations are planting their flags everywhere, claiming that. Anyway, some of the gray whales, looking for food probably, during the summer when it's open, have gone into the Atlantic. And then when fall comes and it freezes up, they can't get back. So it's happened 4 times now. Gray whales have been found migrating along the European coast. In one instance, this gray whale came to the Straits of Gibraltar and went perfectly good lagoon. Hung a left turn, went in there, and was photographed off of Israel on a dinner cruise. Some people were out having a party, and this whale went by, and they took pictures of it, and all of a sudden they hit the internet, and right away our phones started ringing, or our emails started. Do you know this whale? We couldn't identify it. Another one happened a couple years later, and then the southern hemisphere part is that a gray whale, was identified off of Namibia. So it crossed the equator and was found, photographed very well by some dolphin researchers off of West Africa. Just one, yeah. And we couldn't identify it from its marks. Everybody in the whole community of colleagues that we have couldn't identify it, but it was skinny. It was pretty thin. And then most recently off of Florida. The gray whale was chugging along and made the news. Actually, this one looked in pretty good shape. Yeah. But it was never seen again, so I don't know what happened to it. We don't know what happened to it, but ever. So they'll explore. If they get a chance, they will explore. So we have, ancient proto-escherichtid fossils in the Mediterranean area that kind of established the lineage as it evolved. And then there were some subfossils found in Florida and in Scandinavia, but those whales were whaled because they're so easy to get, especially with Viking-type vessels, And then, of course, the Yankee whalers out of New England immediately extinguished them and then jumped to right whales, which are easier to catch, and it yielded more oil. So they were in the Atlantic, northern Atlantic, definitely resident in the North Pacific, but nothing that would point to the fact that they stayed permanently in the southern hemisphere.
Steve, I want to thank you again for coming out.
It's my pleasure. similar but not identical scores. So we brought in the drones. You see here are the blowholes where they breathe, and there's nice smooth bed. ancestral